We are honored to have Admiral Locklear here to speak as our speaker. To introduce the Admiral is our own Rear Admiral William Center, or as we fondly call him, Past President Bill.
Well, it's my pleasure to introduce Vice Admiral Sam Locklear, Commander of the United States Third Fleet. I asked Sam to come up here with me so you could all see him while I introduce him. People often ask me, well, aren't you a little young to retire from the Navy? And as you can see, they had no trouble replacing us, did they, Tom? So they get younger and better looking every year. I'm just going to tell you, if you look on the blue sheet, you can read all about Admiral Locklear. He's had a distinguished career. I want to tell you about his job as Commander of the United States Third Fleet. We have 5 fleets. The Second Fleet on our East Coast. I've got this right.
Yeah, got that?
Yeah, geez. I had a momentary confusion of Second Fleet's on the East Coast. Third Fleet is on the West Coast, all the way out to Hawaii. 7th Fleet in the Western Pacific. Admiral Hayward commanded the 7th Fleet in his career. We've got the 6th Fleet in the Mediterranean, and the 5th Fleet is now in the Central Com area of responsibility in North Arabian Sea, the Persian Gulf, and there is obviously a lot of activity there. As the 3rd Fleet Commander, Admiral Locklear's job is to prepare his forces, the forces that are home ported here in the Pacific, for duty in the forward areas, to go out there and do the nation's work in harm's way, to make sure that those ships, sailors, submarines, aircraft are all ready to go in A1 shape. He's also responsible for disaster response throughout a very large area of responsibility. And he's also one of the Joint Task Force commanders under the U.S. Pacific Command. It's a big job, and I can tell you that he's up to it. Would you please welcome Vice Admiral Sam Locklear.
Well, thanks, Bill. My bio on there is just like my mother wrote it, so enjoy it. Last year, when Bill was the president here, I understand that your guest speaker then was CNO Mike Mullen, who's a high school mate of yours and an academy classmate of his from class of '68. So maybe you should elect him president more often, then he can get the CNO to come instead of the 3-star. But actually, I did sit with the CNO a couple of weeks ago, and I told him I was coming out here to be with you during Seafair. And believe it or not, every year in his calendar, Seafair shows up, and there's a conscious decision about whether he comes or not. Now, this particular year, he had a social engagement he had to go to where he's sitting with a few of his very closest friends having a casual conversation the last couple of days. So actually, we're looking forward to his confirmation as chairman. And then I would assume in the next few days, we've been expecting it, last week or so was the announcement of who the next Chief of Naval Operations will be. I do not know. I think the press thinks they know, but we certainly in the Navy don't know. So we're anxiously awaiting that. But I want to thank you for having me here today. And I'd like to start out by thanking a few people. First of all, the Jaffas, you do a great job here in helping orchestrate this and making sure that we stay focused on these events and how important they are to us, to both the Navy and to the Pac Northwest. To John Iverson, thank you, sir. To the Seattle Rotarians, the community, and the business leaders who have been hosting this event and the events that will occur for us later this week. I'd also like to just recognize again CNO Hayward. I had not anticipated you being here today, nor your lovely bride. But, I've been in the Navy now since I was 17. I'm 53 this year. Part of that time, one of my first experiences on ship was about 1978. And as you recall, C.N.O. Hayward was the C.N.O., I think, from 78 to 82, if I have those dates right. We had a good Navy then, but it wasn't a great Navy, and it had a lot of challenges. And it takes leaders in all parts of our society to step forward and to make very difficult decisions. And as I look back over those 36 or so years I've been in the Navy, there's been a couple of pivotal people that I remember that are just embedded in my memory of what they've done to move our Navy in a different direction. And I'd say, C.N.O. Hayward, you are right on that list. I remember sitting on my first guided missile destroyer. It was a tough time for our Navy. We had to recapitalize. The country was going through some pretty tough social issues in the 70s. We were dealing with drug problems in our Navy at that time and our services in general. And I remember sitting there as an ensign on this ship. In those days, we didn't have television on ships. We had to do everything by radio, or they'd send you an old beta tape or a VHA tape, and you'd put it in the thing and watch. And so they called us, all the officers in the wardroom, and I had never seen the C.N.O. In fact, when you're an ensign, you don't worry too much about who the C.N.O. is. But they made us all sit down, and they sat in the wardroom, and they plugged in this tape, and there, sitting fair and square of the camera, was this magnificent-looking 4-star Chief of Naval Operations, this man right here. And he talked through the direction that the Navy would head, not the direction it was in, but the direction it would take. And he got down to things like about drug use in the Navy, and he pointed in that camera, and I can remember it perfectly. He said, "Not in my Navy." And those type of leaders come around very, very few, but they come around at the right time in history. And he came around at the right time in history and set our Navy, and I believe our nation on a different course when it comes to how we expect people to behave, even in our professional sector today. Because of a lot of what happened in those years about the Navy becoming not tolerant to drug use because of the issues it was imposing on our readiness, have now filtered into many sectors of our society. And thank you, sir, for doing that and all the other great things you did. So understand that this Rotary Club is the second largest in the world. Is that right? Have I got that? Fourth largest in the world?
No, second largest.
Second largest, fourth oldest. That's not the average age of the participants, is it? How do you calculate fourth oldest? In the number of years? Okay. Only teasing. Only teasing. But the work you do for the Seattle community is truly remarkable. And it's really no doubt of why you have such a world-class city here, is because you have these type of people participating in the future of that. I hear that good future naval officer back there in the back. When he first started crying, I thought it was a Navy recruiter had sat down at your table. You know, we're starting out pretty young recruiting these days. But the numerous projects that you do for this great city, your focus on scholarship, your focus on programs that help education, and your tradition of service above self are really, I think, what make this city wonderful and are keeping with the same kind of core values that we as a Navy enjoy today. So I want to offer each of you my sincerest gratitude for what you contribute, and also for the warm welcome that you've given my shipmates here today and the shipmates that are on these ships, and both from our Navy, from our friends in the Coast Guard, and from our partners in the Canadian Navy. Now, this is my first visit to Seafair as a 3rd Fleet Commander, but it's not my first visit to Seafair. My first visit to Seafair was in 1974. I was a young midshipman at the Naval Academy, and I had just finished my plebe year. And they said, well, now you're going to go on a summer cruise. So they shipped us out to the West Coast, and I embarked upon this LPD. Recruiters are now double teaming her back there. And so they shipped us out here to the West Coast, and they put us on this training ship. And the first thing they said was, you're going to go to the Seattle Seafair. Now, I'm from a little place called Duncan, South Carolina. And a fair to me means you've got pigs and chickens and goats and cows and Ferris wheels. So I was a little bit interested in what would happen. So we sailed up the coast, and as we made the turn into the Straits of Juan de Fuca to make the passage through the Puget Sound, the only thing I could say to myself was, oh my God, I had never seen such a more magnificent place on the face of the earth than this. And through the 36 years I've been doing this and the places that I've traveled around the world, there is no more beautiful place than this. We made the transit into town, and for the next couple of weeks we stayed here, and it was, as you know it here, parades, lovely scenery, beautiful young Seattle girls at that time, as they are today, festivities, just a wonderful thing. And I said to myself over the years, I kept trying to replicate that experience in various places around the world, and I hadn't done it yet, but I kept asking to come back to Seafair and always got turned down until now. I finally had to be 3 stars so I could order myself up here. But it is really a truly wonderful opportunity. In fact, my wife Pam and I had an opportunity I think it's about 15, 16 years ago, to be stationed up here in the Pac Northwest. We were stationed in Bremerton. I was the XO of a nuclear cruiser over there. And of course, the time I was here in 1974, it's just like it is today. The weather was perfect for 2 or 3 weeks. I even went salmon fishing somewhere up in the north and caught these big giant salmon. And she said, "What is it like in the Pac Northwest in Seattle?" I said, "It's magnificent." So we moved to Bremerton, and it rained for 264 days that year, the first year we were here. But it was magnificent, even through all that. And I'd also tell you that in this area, we have 2 of the most dearest things in our world, and that's our 2 grandsons, who are with our daughter up in Whidbey Island. We're a Navy family, and her husband is a prowler pilot up there, stationed out of Whidbey. He's been gone quite a bit recently, but we're going to get the opportunity to see them while we're here. So we're really, really happy to be here. In addition to the festivities that we have here today, we're going to see the Blue Angels. That's a continuing tradition here, and we're very proud of that organization. We've got 3 ships participating. Those ships are the USS Cleveland, the USS Rents, the Bunker Hill. The U.S. Coast Guard is represented by the great Coast Guard cutter Steadfast. And the Canadians have sent HMCS Nanaimo, I think I got that right, Edmonton, and Brandon. So if you get a chance to get down and see these ships, I really hope you take that opportunity, and that you take your family and your friends and your colleagues down and see what these men and women of these great navies are doing. So I'm glad to see that we have a continued opportunity to participate in Seafair as a Navy. And as I said, it really is an honor. It's a great festivity. But I think it demonstrates something very important in the world we live in today. It demonstrates that in a world that's relatively unstable, and where there's parts of it, as you know, that are at war, and there's an exportation of terror around the globe, it's important that we continue to do these type of events and not be afraid to do them, and not to be able to afraid to show to the people that of the world that we're not going to be held hostage in our own country by fear, and that we're going to continue to do these wonderful things. Now, when I entered the Navy over 35, 36 years ago, I could not have imagined that someday I would end up being a 3-star in a fleet commander position. And I'm truly honored and humbled for that. I just couldn't imagine it. And as I look back on it, it wasn't the things I did, because I made a lot of mistakes, but it was the magnificent people that worked for me that allowed me to get to this position of leadership. So I'm really thankful and humbled about it. But I would also not have imagined that the world would be like it is today. And many of you probably, if you look back 36 years, you would probably not have guessed it'd be like what it is. In many ways, it's magnificent, but in many ways, it's challenged. There's been a tremendous amount of change in a lot of different areas, but there's 3 areas of change that are most significant to me as I look back over it. First is the rapid globalization of the world. It's just been unbelievable. The amount of globalization of trade, of people, of information. When you call and you make your airline reservation, you're talking to someone in India. When you want a part for anything you have, it may come from anywhere in the world. Just unbelievable how fast globalization has grown. And there's good about that, and there's bad about that. The second change is the exponential growth in population. I think here in this country, we don't recognize that so much, but when you travel around, there's a lot of people out there, and it's growing at an exponential rate. Some have called it a population bomb that's going off. But today there's over 6.5 billion people in the world. In the next 3 decades, they expect that to grow to over 9.5 billion people, all competing for resources. And many of those people are going to grow up in places that are least capable of handling them. They're going to be a population that are primarily in cities. Their average age will be less than 25. Many of them will be unemployed, without jobs, and without hope, or what I would call disenfranchised. The things they will have: cell phones, iPods, televisions, and internet. And they're going to be able to see what we hear, the type of life we live here, and the liberties we enjoy, and also the privileges that we enjoy. And that's going to make things complicated. And the third change, which I never would have predicted, is the resurgence of fundamental extremism that's blurring the national borders of countries. And this extremism is providing a vehicle for disenfranchised people to export hate in many, many different venues. So a lot of change. But despite those changes, I think there's some constants, particularly from a naval perspective. Remember, I'm an admiral, so I have to think about the Navy and what it means to us. But the first constant is that no matter how much things change, 2/3 of the world is still covered by water. And that water act as highways for globalization. And that water has to be monitored and has to be policed. The second constant is that despite the technological advances that we have in information flow, air travel, etc., still over 90% of anything that moves in the world moves on the water. 90%. Whether those are war goods, whether they are what Walmart sends every day, 90% of it. And that's probably not going to change. And then the third thing that's a constant is of all the people in the world, about 80% of them will continue to live now and will continue to live within 200 miles of a coast. Of a coast of an ocean, of a coast of a sea. And so when I look at those changes I talked about, and I look at the constants, and I say, what does that mean for our Navy? And what does it mean for these young Navy shipmates of mine who are sitting around for the future? Well, I think it means that they got a big job to do, and they're going to be really, really busy, no matter how you look at it. It means that by necessity, they will be increasingly forward deployed. You know, we talk about our up-tempo and how much we're gone from home, but the world is 2/3 of its water. Globalization has spread industry, has spread everything to almost every corner of this globe, and we're going to have to be out there to impact it if we want to protect our national interest. It also means that to get the job done, these fine people are going to have to be able to participate and interact with our friends and allies in ways they haven't done before. There's no way that I don't think this country can build a Navy big enough to cover a globalized world that's covered 2/3 of it by water. I just don't think we can do it. And so we're going to have to rely on our friends and allies, like our partnership with our Canadian friends, our Mexican friends to the south, people who share the same type of values of liberty and commerce that this country does. And this ties in very well with what Admiral Mullen may have mentioned to you last year about our concept of a 1,000-ship Navy. It's where we enable, in many ways, or we participate and enable other navies to help us do this job that's going to be very, very difficult in the future. It also means that these young folks out here are going to have to remain prepared for symmetric and asymmetric threats that are increasing exponentially. Now, what type of threats are symmetric threats? I would say submarine technology that's exploding in some of the more modernized countries, and ballistic missile technology that's going to be exported around the globe. The asymmetric threats are those that, as you read about every day in the paper today, that are low-tech but can do a lot of damage, like improvised explosive devices that are not only on land but will be on the sea. It also means that these young people are going to have to grow new skills in things like riverine warfare, an area that we abandoned back after Vietnam, but we found we have to regrow. It means that our special forces focus is going to have to grow. It means that they're going to have new skills to be able to do things like homeland protection, something that for the last 36 years I never worried about. I always thought that San Diego and Seattle were going to be safe. I never worried about it. But today we do. And these same people sitting here that are going to be forward deployed doing that protection of global sea lanes around the world are also going to be responsible for ensuring your day-to-day security from terrorist threats along a very large coast, and in the other case, the Atlantic, 2 very large coasts. Now, it means that they're also going to have to increasingly participate in things like humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. Just today, we have the USS Peleliu, which is a big deck amphib, that's deployed into the Southeast Asia on a humanitarian assistance mission. We loaded it up with about 300 medical doctors and medical teams, and we're putting them into some of the most remote, disenfranchised areas of the world and providing medical assistance. People say, well, why would you do that? Well, I think it's important that we look at these areas where terrorism is going to spread and that we try to influence that in a positive way rather than just standing by and letting it happen. And we are seeing some successes in that. But we have to develop that skill set because we believe it's going to be very, very important as we go from 6.5 billion people in the world to 9 or 10 billion people in the next couple of decades. It also means that for these people that the equipment that we buy for them and that we put in their hands to use has got to be first rate. It's got to be world class. It's got to be given to them when they need it on time. And it's got to be given to them in the sufficient numbers to allow them to get the job done. It also means that when we send them in harm's way, which we're doing today, and they come back broken, and there's a number coming back broken, that we don't desert them, that we stand by them, that we do everything possible to recognize their sacrifice and ensure their futures. So really it boils down to is that they need our support, they need our attention, they need us caring about what they do. You know, we as a nation have proven, I think we've proven, that an all-volunteer Navy works, but it's not without challenges. One of the downsides of an all-volunteer military, or in this case, my case, an all-volunteer Navy, is that we very much run the risk of becoming out of touch with the population that we serve. That we very much become a convenience rather than a necessity for the American people. And so it's very important to us that this type of venue like Seafair, we're able to get together and to demonstrate to the community and the community to demonstrate the mutual trust and mutual respect between what we do for you and why we do it for you, because ultimately we exist to serve you and to serve your interest. And I don't want to be too pessimistic, but I think we do have a lot of challenges as a Navy in the coming decades, and we're going to need your support. Now, your support in the Pac Northwest is magnificent at this point in time, and we absolutely need to stay that way. You know, with the 2 aircraft carriers, the number of submarines and surface ships you have based up here, you have over 70,000 military members and their families in this area. 16,000 civilian employees, which are just as important to our Navy as our uniformed members are. These people make their home in the Pac Northwest, and they're part of who you are. And that makes this region one of the largest fleet concentrations for us in the world. And it's very, very important to us. And so everything you do here to recognize and to keep these young people moving in the right direction and helping put in their hands the tools they need for the future is very important. Now, your Navy is strong today, but it is under some pressure. Right now, we're a force of about 278 ships and submarines. We'd like to grow that to over 300 in the next few years. That includes 11 aircraft carrier strike groups, 2 of which are homeported right here in the state of Washington, and none of them are here now. They're all gone. In fact, I was driving across the Coronel Bay Bridge, is where my headquarters are, and there's a large fleet concentration in San Diego with Pam the other day, and I usually look right down at 32nd Street where all the ships are. And I looked down there and I said, Pam, where is the fleet? And where is my fleet? And it's not in San Diego, and it's not in the Pacific Northwest. They're deployed. They're out there on the front lines doing the things you need them to do. So today, of that 278 ships, 138 of them are underway right this minute. 100 of them are deployed to places that I would consider war zones. In top of that, we have a Navy that's about 341,000 people in active duty military. We have a very, very valuable reserve component of about 128,000 people. We could not do our job today without those reservists. Many of you, who's a reservist sitting in the audience, who has been one? We could not do the job without those fine people. And finally, something that I don't think is widely recognized, we have over 11,000 sailors who are deployed on the ground in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, the Horn of Africa, that are doing non-traditional Navy jobs to take some of the stress off our joint force today. And they're doing magnificently over there. So we have a great Navy. We have a great relationship up here in the Pac Northwest. Your support is critical to us, and I couldn't be happier to be here. I'll take some minute for some questions. I think we have to get a microphone in your hand. There you go, so it'll get on the videotape.
You didn't specifically mention piracy, but what fraction of your resources and effort go towards the actual dealing with pirates as opposed to organized threats like the wars that are going on?
Yes, sir. Everybody got that question? Could you hear it? About piracy? What fraction goes to it? Well, the way we construct our Navy generally is that when we build our force structure, our ships, it's multi-mission capability in single platforms. And so inside of every surface ship that we build, there's ability for that surface ship to have a mission area which deals with what you would call anti-piracy activities, which would be close-in combat with small boats. It would be monitoring of small boats, that type of thing. So it's built right into it. We specifically have teams on each of our ships that are trained to do boardings, in hostile environments. And then we have some higher-end technologies and higher-end trained people in our Special Forces and in our Marine Corps that would, if the situation really got large, that we'd bring them into a piracy situation to help handle it. Now, do we do piracy patrols around the globe today? I think just inherently by the nature that we're there, we're doing it. But it's a challenge. And as I said earlier, we have to partner with our friends and allies around the world to make this happen, because there are some pretty vulnerable choke points in the world where all that globalized trade that I talked about, most of it flows through some of those choke points.
To follow up that question, in the area of interdiction with Homeland Security problems and so on, how do you interface with the Coast Guard? At what levels? Both in management levels and on-site levels like in Seattle Harbor?
That's a great question. We've done a tremendous amount of work in the last 4 or 5 years with our Coast Guard partners. And I would say that in the area of homeland defense, homeland security, that it might be a model for other agencies to look at, because we have a similar cultures, and it makes us very, very easy to coordinate with. On this coast alone, the Coast Guard PAC Area West Commander, who is a 3-star in San Francisco, and I have a coordinated concept of operation that he and I co-sign that deals with how we coordinate in homeland defense scenarios for the entire coast. And it also is done in conjunction with our friends from Canada. We actually run exercises routinely off this coast for maritime interdiction operations for potential threats that might be coming into major ports on this coast. And so I think we're doing quite well in that. The Coast Guard's a magnificent service. They do a tremendous amount for this nation with not a lot of resources. And by having us come in with them, we can add resources that make that homeland defense problem solution much more robust.
Thank you for your service.
I think that's all the questions we have time for. Don't go away now, because I have Before the Admiral gets away, I wanted to give him this plaque, which has been made for him to commemorate his speaking today. Thank you, Admiral, again. Enjoy Seafair, mates.
Seattle Rotary Online is made possible in part by a grant from Enterprise Seattle. For over 35 years, Enterprise Seattle has provided client-based economic development services to businesses throughout King County and its 39 cities. More information on Enterprise Seattle and how they help businesses grow and prosper can be found at www.enterpriseseattle.org. And by First Choice Health, working with the Washington Health Information Collaborative to use technology to bring better health care to patients throughout the Pacific Northwest. First Choice Health.